On the harshest winter morning ever recorded in Alaska's remote wilderness, Michael Crawford's routine morning at his isolated cabin transformed into something that would challenge everything humanity thought they knew about wildlife intelligence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The digital thermometer mounted outside his frost-covered window flickered at an unthinkable -65 degrees Fahrenheit, as Arctic winds tore through the spruce forest with devastating force. But it wasn't the life-threatening cold that made him drop his steaming mug of coffee onto his hand-carved wooden floor. It was the unprecedented sight that appeared before him in the pre-dawn darkness. Through the thick frost patterns crystallizing on his reinforced windows, Michael found himself face to face with a sight that would soon become the most studied wildlife encounter in modern history. A massive Kodiak bear, her fur encased in sheets of ice that caught the dim light of his porch lamp, stood fully upright against his cabin wall. But it was what she did next that made Michael question everything he knew about animal consciousness. The bear, easily over 9 feet tall when standing, deliberately raised her paw and began tapping on his window in a pattern that couldn't be dismissed as random. 3 quick taps, followed by 2 slow ones, repeated with unsettling precision. Behind her, 4 cubs huddled together in the merciless wind, their bodies trembling violently as the temperature continued to plummet. The smallest 2 cubs, likely the runts of her litter, had already begun showing signs of severe hypothermia, their movements growing sluggish in the deepening snow. The mother's eyes, filled with an intelligence that seemed to transcend the natural world, locked onto Michael's face with an intensity that spoke of desperate understanding. The wind, screaming through the ancient spruce trees, carried with it tiny ice crystals that seemed to freeze instantly on any surface they touched. Michael watched in disbelief as the cubs' fur began to crystallize, their small bodies fighting against conditions that would challenge even the most advanced Arctic survival gear. The mother bear's actions grew increasingly deliberate. Each movement seemed calculated to convey a message that defied everything Michael had learned in his 15 years as a wildlife photographer in Alaska's untamed wilderness. In the dim light of the approaching dawn, the mother bear began a series of behaviors that would later force the scientific community to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about ursine intelligence. She alternated between checking her weakening cubs and performing gestures at the window that seemed impossible for a wild animal, pointing to her cubs, then to Michael's door, then making a clear sheltering motion with her massive paws. Lay, smallest cub, its black fur, now almost white with frost, stumbled and fell into a snowdrift. What happened next would change forever how humans understood the cognitive capabilities of wild animals. The mother bear, with movements that displayed impossible gentleness, lifted her fallen cub and pressed it against Michael's window. Her eyes, filled with what could only be described as tears, met his with an intensity that transcended species barriers. She wasn't just asking for help, she was communicating in a way that would force humanity to question everything they thought they knew about the limitations of animal consciousness. As Michael stood frozen in his living room, the security cameras he used to document wildlife were capturing footage that would soon challenge every preconception about wild animal behavior. The mother bear had begun what appeared to be a deliberate demonstration, showing each of her cubs in turn, their conditions deteriorating rapidly in the lethal cold. But it was her next action that would leave even the most skeptical scientists struggling to explain what they were witnessing. The Arctic. Wind howled with renewed fury, driving the temperature to levels that hadn't been recorded in Alaska's history. Ice crystals formed on the cub's fur with frightening speed, their small bodies shaking so violently that Michael could hear their whimpers through his triple-paned windows. The mother bear's response to her cub's suffering defied all natural laws. She began creating marks in the snow, deliberate patterns that resembled crude but recognizable symbols, all while maintaining eye contact with Michael. Emergency alerts began blaring from Michael's satellite phone, warning of an unprecedented Arctic front sweeping down from the polar region. The automated message spoke of temperatures that could freeze exposed flesh in seconds, but Michael barely registered the words. His attention remained fixed on the extraordinary scene unfolding outside his window, where the mother bear's behavior had evolved into something that challenged the very foundations of what scientists believed possible. The bear's massive form, now covered in a thick layer of ice that made her appear almost crystalline in the growing dawn light, began a series of movements that displayed a level of cognitive ability never before documented in wild animals. She gathered small branches from the ground, arranging them in front of Michael's window in patterns that couldn't be dismissed as random. The formation clearly resembled an arrow, pointing toward his reinforced steel door, followed by what appeared to be a crude representation of a shelter. Behind her, the four cubs' condition deteriorated with frightening speed. The two smallest cubs, their black fur now completely white with frost, huddled together in a desperate attempt to share what little body heat remained. The third cub, slightly larger than its siblings, struggled to remain standing, its legs trembling violently as the Arctic wind cut through their natural defenses like a knife. The fourth and largest cub, though clearly stronger than its siblings, showed signs of succumbing to the deadly cold, its movements becoming increasingly sluggish. The mother bear's response to her cub's worsening condition defied everything Michael had witnessed in his decades of wildlife photography. She began a series of demonstrations that seemed designed to communicate the urgency of their situation. First, she gathered all four cubs close to her body, trying to shelter them from the brutal wind. Then, in a display of problem-solving ability that would later astound behavioral scientists, she began collecting fallen pine boughs, attempting to create a makeshift windbreak. When this proved insufficient against the historic cold, she returned to Michael's window with renewed determination. What happened next would become the subject of countless scientific studies and documentary films. The mother bear, her movements, deliberate and precise, began creating a series of marks in the snowbank beside Michael's cabin. Using her claws with surgical precision, she etched what appeared to be crude but recognizable pictographs. First, a simple drawing that resembled a house, then four smaller shapes next to a larger one, a family. The intelligence required to create such representations would later force researchers to completely reevaluate their understanding of ursine cognitive capabilities. The wind's intensity increased, driving the temperature even lower. The two smallest cubs collapsed simultaneously, their tiny bodies no longer able to fight against the killing cold. The mother's reaction sent chills down Michael's spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. She rushed to her fallen cubs, gently lifting them one at a time, and returned to Michael's window. With movements that seemed impossible for a creature of her size, she held them up to the glass, pressing them against the surface as if trying to show Michael the severity of their condition. The third cub began showing signs of severe hypothermia, its movements becoming uncoordinated and jerky. The mother bear's attention split between her fallen cubs and her weakening ones, her actions growing more desperate with each passing moment. She alternated between attempting to warm her collapsed cubs and creating more elaborate signals at Michael's window. Her eyes, filled with an intelligence that seemed almost supernatural, never left his face. In a display of problem-solving, ability that would later be studied in universities worldwide, the mother bear began using the ice crystals forming on Michael's window to her advantage. She discovered that by pressing her warm paw against the frost, she could create clear spots in the ice buildup. Using this technique, she began making deliberate patterns, simple shapes that couldn't be dismissed as random. A circle, a square, and what appeared to be an arrow pointing toward his door. The largest cub, still standing but weakening rapidly, joined its mother's desperate attempt to communicate. In a display of learned behavior that would challenge everything scientists thought they knew about wildlife intelligence, the cub began mimicking its mother's gestures. It pressed its smaller paw against the window, creating its own marks in the frost, following the same pattern its mother had established. The brutal wind drove sheets of snow against the cabin with such force that the thick logs groaned under the assault. The temperature continued its historic plunge, and the mother bear's actions became even more extraordinary. She began performing a series of behaviors that seemed designed to demonstrate her understanding of human dwellings. She pointed to Michael's door handle, then made a turning motion with her paw. She indicated the window latch, then pantomimed a lifting gesture. These weren't the random movements of a desperate animal. They showed a clear understanding of human mechanisms. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The two smallest cubs, still motionless in the snow, had begun to develop a layer of ice over their fur that reflected the dim morning light like tiny mirrors. The mother bear's response to this escalating crisis demonstrated problem-solving, abilities that would later be compared to those of primates. She began gathering snow, packing it into crude stairs leading up to Michael's window, perhaps understanding that elevation might help her cubs be more visible to him. Another emergency alert shrieked from Michael's satellite phone, warning that the temperature would continue to drop for at least another hour. The mother bear's head snapped toward the sound, her eyes showing clear recognition of the device as something significant. In what would later be described as one of the most extraordinary examples of animal intelligence ever recorded, she began timing her communication attempts to coincide with the alert sounds, as if understanding that these represented important moments of human attention. The remaining standing cubs, now severely weakened by the cold, huddled against their mother's massive form. Their coordination had deteriorated to the point where they could barely remain upright, their small bodies swaying dangerously with each gust of the lethal wind. The mother bear's desperate attempts to save her family had evolved into a display of intelligence so extraordinary that it would force humanity to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the limitations of animal consciousness. Michael stood at his window, his own breath creating frost patterns that merged with those made by the bears outside. He watched as the mother bear, in one final desperate attempt to communicate, began a series of gestures so deliberate and complex that they would later be analyzed frame by frame by experts in animal behavior. She pointed to each of her cubs in turn, then to herself, then made a clear sheltering motion with her paws. Finally, She did something that seemed to defy the very laws of nature. She lowered her massive head in what could only be described as a bow, maintaining this submissive posture while making eye contact with Michael through the frost-covered glass. The implications of her behavior were staggering. This wasn't just unusual animal behavior. This was something that would force scientists to re-evaluate everything they thought they knew about wildlife intelligence. The mother bear wasn't just seeking shelter. She was demonstrating an understanding of human social structures and communication that should have been impossible for a wild animal. Her actions showed not just intelligence, but a form of consciousness that bridged the gap between human and animal in ways that would be studied for decades to come. As Michael watched the incredible scene unfold before him, the mother bear's actions transcended into a realm of complexity that would later revolutionize our understanding of animal intelligence. Her next series of behaviors displayed not just desperate communication, but a sophisticated understanding of human social dynamics that should have been impossible for a wild creature. The massive Kodiak bear, her fur now resembling an intricate lattice of ice crystals, began what appeared to be a methodical demonstration of peaceful intentions. She systematically backed away from the window, maintaining eye contact with Michael, and began a series of movements that experts would later compare to ancient peacemaking rituals. She exposed her vulnerable areas, throat, stomach, and the soft underside of her paws, in a display that went far beyond simple submission. The four cubs' conditions had deteriorated to critical levels. The two smallest, their bodies now almost completely still, were covered in a layer of frost that sparkled ominously in the strengthening dawn light. The third cub had begun to show signs of severe neurological impairment, its movements becoming increasingly uncoordinated as hypothermia took hold. Even the largest and strongest cub, which had been standing guard near its siblings, started to sway dangerously on its feet. In response to her cub's dire situation, the mother bear elevated her communication attempts to unprecedented levels of sophistication. She began creating complex sequences of movements that appeared to tell a story. First, she pointed to the distant mountains, then made digging motions in the snow, followed by gestures that seemed to indicate a cave-in or collapse. The narrative was clear. Something had driven them from their winter den, forcing this desperate journey through the lethal cold. The intelligence displayed in this storytelling attempt stunned Michael. This wasn't just mimicry or learned behavior. This was abstract communication, the ability to reference past events and explain current circumstances. The mother bear's eyes filled with an awareness that seemed to transcend species boundaries, never left Michael's face as she continued her extraordinary demonstration. The Arctic wind, howling through the ancient spruce forest with renewed fury, drove the temperature to levels that threatened even the bear's legendary cold tolerance. Ice crystals formed in the air, creating diamond-like sparkles in the early morning light that would have been beautiful if they weren't so deadly. The mother bear's response to this escalating threat demonstrated problem-solving abilities that would later be studied in research institutions worldwide. She began constructing a temporary shelter for her cubs, using fallen branches and snow, showing an understanding of engineering principles that should have been beyond her capabilities. The structure, though crude, effectively blocked the worst of the wind, but even as she worked, it was clear that this solution was temporary at best. The cubs' condition continued to deteriorate, their bodies' temperature dropping dangerously low despite their mother's efforts. The mother bear's next actions displayed a level of emotional intelligence that would challenge the very foundations of what scientists thought possible in non-human species. She gathered her weakest cubs, cradling them with impossible gentleness, and began what appeared to be a morning ritual. She touched her nose to each cub's face, making soft sounds that carried clearly through the thick glass of Michael's window. The remaining cubs, still barely conscious, joined in this demonstration of family bonds, each touching their siblings in turn. This display of emotional awareness and family connection transcended mere survival instinct. The mother bear was demonstrating not just intelligence, but emotional complexity that rivaled human understanding. Her actions showed awareness of mortality, family bonds, and the concept of comfort in crisis, abilities that would force researchers to completely reimagine the capabilities of wild animals. As the crisis deepened, the mother bear's attempts at communication became increasingly sophisticated. She discovered that by breathing on the frozen window, she could create areas of temporary clarity in the frost. Using this technique, she began creating patterns that resembled crude but recognizable symbols. First, a simple circle, perhaps representing shelter. Then 4 smaller shapes next to a larger one, clearly representing her family. Finally, an arrow pointing toward Michael's door. The complexity of these symbols demonstrated an understanding of abstract representation that would later be compared to early human cave paintings. This wasn't just problem-solving, this was the creation and use of symbols to communicate complex ideas, a capability previously thought to be exclusively human. The 2 smallest cubs, their condition now critical, had stopped shivering entirely, a deadly sign that their bodies were giving up the fight against the cold. The mother bear's response to this crisis demonstrated yet another level of sophisticated understanding. She began creating small snowbanks around her cubs, using her massive body to shield them from the wind, while packing snow around them in a way that created primitive but effective insulation. This understanding of thermal principles, using snow's insulating properties to preserve body heat, showed a grasp of physical concepts that went far beyond instinct. The mother bear was actively problem-solving, using environmental elements in ways that demonstrated clear comprehension of cause and effect. The largest cub, still fighting against the lethal cold, began mimicking its mother's communication attempts in a display of learned behavior that would later become the subject of numerous scientific studies. It pressed its paw against the window, creating its own symbols in the frost, following the same patterns its mother had established. This wasn't just imitation. It was the active transmission of learned communication techniques from mother to offspring. As the morning light strengthened, it revealed the full scope of the Arctic storm that had trapped this family. Ice crystals filled the air, creating halos around the sparse light that managed to penetrate the thick cloud cover. The mother bear's next actions demonstrated an understanding of light and visibility that seemed impossible for a wild animal. She began positioning her cubs in the areas where the light was strongest, ensuring they remained visible to Michael through the frost-covered window. The sophistication of her understanding became even more apparent as she began using the strengthening light to enhance her communication attempts. She positioned herself so that her shadows created distinct patterns on the snow, adding another layer of complexity to her already extraordinary attempts at communication. This manipulation of environmental elements to enhance communication showed a level of cognitive sophistication that would force scientists to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about animal intelligence. The mother bear's desperate attempts to save her family had evolved into a display of intelligence so extraordinary that it would challenge the very foundations of how humans understood animal consciousness. Her actions showed not just problem-solving ability, but a form of reasoning that bridged the gap between instinct and intelligence in ways that would be studied for decades to come. Each gesture, each attempt at communication, built upon the previous ones in a way that demonstrated clear understanding of cause and effect, abstract representation, and emotional complexity. This wasn't just a desperate animal seeking shelter. This was a thinking, reasoning being using every tool at her disposal to save her family. The implications of her behavior would force humanity to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the limitations of animal consciousness. The weather alert system on Michael's satellite phone began issuing warnings with unprecedented urgency, describing conditions that hadn't been seen in Alaska since the last ice age. But what caught Michael's attention wasn't the dire predictions of record-breaking cold. It was the mother bear's immediate reaction to the electronic sounds. Her head snapped toward the device with a recognition that showed clear understanding of human technology's significance. In what would later be described as one of the most extraordinary examples of animal adaptability ever documented, the mother bear began synchronizing her communication attempts with the alert sounds. Each time the warning system activated, she intensified her gestures, as if understanding that these moments represented heightened human attention. This wasn't just reaction to noise. This was strategic timing that demonstrated an understanding of human behavior patterns. The four cubs' condition had reached a critical point that demanded immediate intervention. The two smallest cubs, their bodies now completely still, had developed a crystalline coating of frost that made them look like ice sculptures. The third cub's movements had become dangerously erratic, its neurological system clearly impacted by the severe cold. Even the largest cub, which had shown remarkable resilience, was now struggling to maintain its balance against the brutal Arctic wind. The mother bear's response to this escalating crisis demonstrated a level of problem-solving ability that would later be compared to primate intelligence. She began gathering loose snow around her weakest cubs, creating what appeared to be a primitive form of igloo. Her movements were precise and deliberate, showing an understanding of structural integrity that went far beyond instinct. She packed the snow in layers, creating small air pockets that maximized insulation. As she worked to protect her cubs, her attention remained fixed on Michael. Her eyes, filled with an intelligence that seemed to transcend species boundaries, conveyed a clear message of urgency and desperation. But there was something else in her gaze, a profound understanding of the situation's gravity that showed awareness far beyond what scientists believed possible in wild animals. The wind's intensity increased to levels that threatened even the structural integrity of Michael's well-built cabin. The ancient spruce trees surrounding the clearing groaned under the assault, their branches heavy with accumulating ice. The mother bear's next actions displayed an understanding of physics that would later be studied in research institutions worldwide. She began positioning her cubs in the wind shadow of the cabin's outer walls, using the building structure to create areas of relative calm. Her ability to identify and utilize these protected spaces showed a grasp of fluid dynamics that should have been impossible for a wild animal. She wasn't just seeking shelter. She was actively analyzing and exploiting the environment's physical properties to protect her family. This level of environmental manipulation would later force scientists to reconsider everything they thought they knew about animal intelligence. The largest cub, still conscious but severely weakened, began displaying behaviors that would later be studied as evidence of generational knowledge transfer. It started mimicking its mother's snow-packing technique, attempting to help build the protective structure around its siblings. This wasn't just imitation, it was active learning and application of complex survival strategies. As the morning light strengthened, it revealed new details of the bear's desperate situation. The mother's fur, now completely encased in ice, had developed patterns that caught the light like natural prisms, creating rainbow refractions that danced across the snow. But it was her next series of actions that would truly capture the attention of the scientific community. She began using these light patterns deliberately, positioning herself so that the refracted light fell on specific areas of the snow where she had created her symbols. This manipulation of natural phenomena to enhance communication showed a level of abstract thinking that would challenge every preconception about animal cognitive capabilities. The mother bear's communication attempts evolved into what appeared to be a complex form of sign language. She began combining her previous symbols with new gestures, creating what researchers would later describe as a primitive but effective form of syntax. She would point to her cubs, then to the sky, then make sweeping motions with her paws that seemed to indicate the passage of time. The message was clear. They were running out of time. In a display of emotional intelligence that would later be compared to human behavior, she began what appeared to be a form of storytelling. Using a combination of gestures, snow drawings, and physical demonstrations, she appeared to be explaining the events that had led to their current crisis. She pointed toward the distant mountains, made digging motions, then demonstrated what looked like a collapse or cave-in. This wasn't just communication. This was narrative creation. The two smallest cubs, now showing no signs of movement, were carefully positioned by their mother in the most visible spot near Michael's window. Their condition had deteriorated to the point where their survival seemed impossible, yet the mother's actions showed no sign of giving up. Instead, her attempts to save them became even more sophisticated. She began creating what appeared to be a primitive form of travois, using fallen branches and her own strength to fashion a makeshift sled. This understanding of tools and their applications demonstrated a level of cognitive ability that would force researchers to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about animal intelligence. The third cub's condition worsened rapidly, its movements becoming increasingly uncoordinated as hypothermia took hold. The mother bear's response to this new crisis showed evidence of medical knowledge that should have been impossible for a wild animal. She began vigorously rubbing the cub's limbs, focusing on its extremities in a way that mimicked human first aid techniques for hypothermia victims. The largest cub, though still conscious, had begun showing signs of severe cold, stress. Its attempts to help its mother had weakened it considerably, yet it continued to demonstrate extraordinary family bonds. It moved between its siblings, touching each one gently with its nose, in what appeared to be a display of comfort and connection that transcended mere survival instinct. The mother bear's next actions demonstrated an understanding of human social structures that would later become the subject of countless research papers. She began what appeared to be a formal request for help, combining all her previous communication attempts into a complex series of movements that seemed almost ceremonial in nature. She started by creating a clear space in the snow, carefully, sweeping it with her paw until it was smooth. Then, with deliberate precision, she began creating a series of marks that researchers would later compare to primitive writing. The symbols, while crude, showed clear intentionality and pattern, suggesting an understanding of representational communication that should have been impossible for a wild animal. As the Arctic wind continued its assault, driving the temperature to levels that threatened even the bear's legendary cold tolerance, the mother's desperate attempts to save her family evolved into something that would challenge humanity's understanding of animal consciousness. Her actions showed not just intelligence, but a form of reasoning that bridged the gap between instinct and cognition in ways that would be studied for decades to come. The implications of her behavior were staggering. This wasn't just unusual animal behavior. This was evidence of cognitive abilities that forced humans to question everything they thought they knew about the limitations of animal intelligence. The mother bear wasn't just seeking shelter, she was demonstrating an understanding of complex concepts that included tool use, symbolic communication, and social structures. Each gesture, each attempt at communication, built upon the previous ones in a way that showed clear understanding of cause and effect, abstract representation, and emotional complexity. This wasn't just a desperate animal seeking shelter. This was a thinking, reasoning being using every tool at her disposal to save her family. In the face of her cub's rapidly deteriorating condition, the mother bear's intelligence evolved into something that transcended all known boundaries of animal behavior. Her next series of actions displayed not just desperate communication, but a sophisticated understanding of human psychology that would later force scientists to completely reimagine the possibilities of animal consciousness. Standing at her full height, the massive Kodiak bear began what appeared to be a calculated demonstration of trust-building behaviors. She systematically moved through a series of postures that experts would later identify as being remarkably similar to ancient peacemaking rituals found in human cultures worldwide. First, she lowered her head, exposing her vulnerable neck. Then she turned slightly sideways, making herself appear less threatening while maintaining eye contact with Michael. What truly astonished him wasn't just her submissive display. It was the way she seemed to be teaching her largest cub to mimic these same behaviors. The young bear, though severely weakened by the cold, followed its mother's example with a precision that spoke of understanding rather than mere imitation. This transmission of complex social behaviors would later be studied as evidence of cultural learning in wild animals. The two smallest cubs, their condition now critical, had reached a state of complete stillness that made Michael's heart race. With urgency, their tiny bodies, covered in a thick layer of frost, barely showed signs of breathing. The mother's response to their deteriorating condition demonstrated problem-solving abilities that went far beyond instinct. She began creating what appeared to be a primitive but effective way to demonstrate their body temperature. Using her massive paw with surgical precision, she cleared a patch of snow down to the frozen ground. Then, she carefully placed one of the weakest cubs in this cleared space. The dark earth beneath the snow quickly frosted over, except for where the cub's body touched it. The mother bear pointed repeatedly between the frost patterns and her cub, then to Michael's cabin. She was demonstrating the rapid heat loss in a way that showed clear understanding of temperature dynamics. The third cub, its movements growing increasingly uncoordinated, attempted to join its mother's demonstration in a display of family cooperation that would later be compared to primate behavior. It began helping to clear another patch of ground, though its weakened state made the task nearly impossible. The mother bear's reaction to her cub's struggle showed evidence of emotional intelligence that would challenge everything scientists thought they knew about wildlife consciousness. Instead of ignoring her cub's ineffective efforts or taking over the task, she modified her own movements to turn the moment into a teaching opportunity. Even in this life-threatening situation, her instinct to educate and guide her offspring remained strong. This wasn't just parental care. This was active mentorship that showed understanding of learning processes. The Arctic wind's intensity increased to levels that made even the ancient spruce trees creak and groan under the assault. Ice crystals formed in the air so thickly that they created a kind of sparkling fog, beautiful but lethal. The mother bear's response to this worsening situation demonstrated an understanding of physics that should have been impossible for a wild animal. She began creating a series of snow barriers, positioning them at precise angles to the wind. These weren't random piles. They were carefully engineered structures that created pockets of calmer air. She used her body to pack the snow in ways that maximized its structural integrity, showing an intuitive understanding of engineering principles that would later be studied in detail by researchers. But it was her next series of actions that truly demonstrated the extraordinary depth of her intelligence. The mother bear began what appeared to be a systematic attempt to demonstrate the concept of time to Michael. She used the movement of shadows cast by his cabin to create a kind of primitive sundial in the snow. With her paw, she marked the shadow's position, then made a series of marks showing its progression. This understanding of time as a measurable concept, combined with her ability to communicate its passage, displayed cognitive abilities that went far beyond what scientists believed possible in non-human species. She wasn't just reacting to the present moment, she was demonstrating an understanding of past, present, and future. The largest cub, though still conscious, had begun showing signs of severe cognitive impairment from the cold. Its movements became increasingly erratic, yet it continued to try to assist its mother. The bond between them, displayed in their coordinated efforts to save their family, would later be studied as evidence of emotional complexity in wild animals that rivaled human relationships. As the morning light strengthened, it revealed new details of their desperate situation. The mother bear's fur, completely encased in ice, had developed patterns that caught the light like natural prisms. But instead of being distracted by these beautiful but deadly ice formations, she began using them purposefully in her communication attempts. She positioned herself so that the refracted light created patterns on the snow, then used these patterns to enhance her symbols. This wasn't just clever use of available resources, this was creative problem-solving that showed an understanding of light properties and their potential for communication. Using these improvised light signals, she began an even more complex form of communication. She created what appeared to be a sequential narrative in the snow, using a combination of paw prints, scratch symbols, and carefully placed debris. Each mark built upon the previous ones, creating a story that explained their presence at Michael's cabin. First, she indicated the distant mountains, then made marks that seemed to represent their den. She demonstrated what appeared to be a collapse or cave-in, followed by their desperate journey through the storm. This wasn't just communication. This was storytelling that showed understanding of cause and effect, sequence and narrative structure. The mother bear's intelligence seemed to grow more sophisticated with each passing moment, as if the desperate situation was forcing her to access deeper levels of cognitive ability. She began combining all her previous communication methods into what researchers would later describe as a primitive but effective form of multimodal communication. She would make a mark in the snow, then accompany it with a specific gesture, followed by a particular vocalization. This combination of visual, physical, and auditory signals created a complex form of communication that showed understanding of how different types of messages could work together to convey meaning. The two smallest cubs, their condition now beyond critical, were positioned by their mother in a way that maximized their visibility through Michael's window, but instead of just displaying them, she began demonstrating what appeared to be respiratory distress. She would point to their barely moving chests, then mimic exaggerated breathing movements, clearly trying to communicate the severity of their condition. The third cub's deteriorating condition led to what would later be described as one of the most extraordinary displays of medical knowledge ever observed in a wild animal. The mother bear began a series of movements that precisely mimicked human first aid techniques for hypothermia. She demonstrated careful handling of extremities, protection of core body temperature, and the importance of gentle movement. This wasn't just instinctive care. This was evidence of medical knowledge that should have been impossible for a wild animal to possess. Her actions showed an understanding of body systems and emergency care that would force researchers to completely reevaluate their assumptions about animal intelligence. As the Arctic storm intensified, driving the temperature to levels that threatened even the bear's legendary cold tolerance, the mother's desperate attempts to save her family evolved into something that would challenge humanity's understanding of consciousness itself. Her actions showed not just intelligence, but a form of reasoning that bridged the gap between instinct and cognition in ways that would be studied for decades to come. The two smallest cubs suddenly collapsed in perfect synchronization, their tiny bodies finally surrendering to the lethal cold. The mother bear's reaction to this crisis demonstrated a level of medical knowledge that would later force scientists to reevaluate everything they understood about animal intelligence. Instead of panicking, she began a series of precisely coordinated emergency responses that mimicked advanced first aid techniques. Moving with impossible grace for a creature her size, she quickly positioned the fallen cubs in what experts would later recognize as the recovery position. She cleared their airways, checked their breathing, and began a series of gentle but firm compressions on their chests. This wasn't instinctive behavior, this was learned medical knowledge being applied with deliberate precision. The third cub, watching its mother's desperate attempts to save its siblings, began displaying behaviors that would later be studied as evidence of emotional intelligence in wild animals. It moved to each fallen cub in turn, gently nuzzling them while making soft vocalizations that seemed designed to comfort. This wasn't just familial bonding. This was emotional support being offered in a crisis. The largest cub, though severely weakened, joined its mother's rescue efforts with remarkable coordination. Working together, mother and cub began what appeared to be a primitive but effective form of tag-team resuscitation. While the mother maintained chest compressions, the larger cub would check for breathing and circulation, showing an understanding of emergency care that went far beyond instinct. The Arctic wind's fury reached new levels of intensity, driving the temperature so low that the moisture in the air froze instantly, creating diamond-like ice crystals that filled the air. The mother bear's response to this escalating environmental threat showed problem-solving abilities that would later be compared to human engineering principles. She began constructing what appeared to be a primitive but effective emergency shelter. Using her massive strength with surgical precision, she created a series of interlocking snow blocks that formed a protective dome around her fallen cubs. This wasn't just random piling of snow. This was architectural design that showed understanding of structural integrity and thermal dynamics. The mother bear's next actions displayed a sophistication in communication that would later be studied in universities worldwide. She began creating what appeared to be a primitive but effective form of mathematical notation in the snow. Using her claws with incredible precision, she scratched out marks that seemed to represent numbers, first pointing to her cubs, then to the marks, then to the sun's position in the sky. This wasn't just random scratching. This was an attempt to communicate specific quantities and time measurements. She was trying to tell Michael exactly how long her cubs had been exposed to the lethal cold, showing an understanding of time as a measurable concept that should have been impossible for a wild animal. The third cub's condition deteriorated rapidly, its movements becoming increasingly uncoordinated as severe hypothermia took hold. The mother's response to this new crisis demonstrated an understanding of triage principles that would later be studied by medical researchers. She quickly assessed which cubs needed immediate attention and which could wait, showing clear comprehension of emergency medical prioritization. Using her body as a shield against the brutal wind, she began what appeared to be a systematic attempt to warm her weakest cubs while maintaining circulation in the stronger ones. She would alternate between vigorous rubbing motions to stimulate blood flow and gentle compressions to maintain heart rate. This wasn't just maternal care. This was advanced medical treatment being administered with clear purpose and understanding. The largest cub, though fighting its own battle against the cold, displayed remarkable dedication to helping its siblings. It began mimicking its mother's warming techniques, showing not just learned behavior, but understanding of the principles behind the actions. This transmission of medical knowledge from mother to offspring would later be studied as evidence of cultural learning in wild animals. The mother bear's attempts to communicate with Michael took on new levels of sophistication. She began what appeared to be a form of sign language, combining her previous symbols with new gestures to create complex messages. She would point to her cubs, then to the cabin, then make a series of movements that seemed to indicate a temporary stay rather than permanent residence. This understanding of temporary versus permanent situations showed a grasp of abstract concepts that should have been impossible for a wild animal. She wasn't just seeking immediate shelter. She was trying to communicate a complete plan that included duration and exit strategy. Using her massive paw with incredible dexterity, she began creating more elaborate symbols in the snow. These weren't just random marks. They appeared to be a primitive form of pictographic writing. She would draw a simple representation of her family, then show them entering the cabin, then leaving once the storm passed. This sequential storytelling showed an understanding of narrative structure that challenged everything scientists thought they knew about animal cognition. The two smallest cubs, still unresponsive, were carefully positioned by their mother in a way that maximized their visibility through Michael's window. But instead of just displaying them, she began demonstrating what appeared to be a primitive form of temperature monitoring. She would touch their bodies, then touch the snow, then point to Michael's cabin, clearly trying to communicate the dangerous temperature differential. The third cub's deteriorating condition led to what would later be described as one of the most extraordinary displays of family cooperation ever observed in wild animals. The mother bear and her largest cub worked together in perfect coordination, one maintaining body heat while the other checked vital signs. This wasn't just instinctive care, this was teamwork that showed understanding of medical emergency protocols. As the Arctic storm reached its peak intensity, the mother bear's desperate attempts to save her family evolved into something that would challenge humanity's understanding of animal consciousness itself. Her actions showed not just intelligence, but a form of reasoning that bridged the gap between instinct and cognition in ways that would be studied for decades to come. The way she orchestrated her family's survival efforts, combining medical knowledge with communication skills and engineering principles, demonstrated levels of problem-solving ability that went far beyond what scientists believed possible in non-human species. This wasn't just a mother trying to save her cubs. This was a thinking, reasoning being using every tool at her disposal to ensure her family's survival. Each gesture, each attempt at communication, each medical intervention built upon the previous ones in ways that showed clear understanding of cause and effect, abstract representation, and complex problem-solving. The mother bear wasn't just reacting to her environment. She was actively analyzing, planning, and implementing sophisticated survival strategies. The implications of her behavior were staggering. This wasn't just unusual animal behavior. This was evidence of cognitive abilities that forced humans to question everything they thought they knew about the limitations of animal intelligence. The mother bear wasn't just seeking shelter. She was demonstrating an understanding of complex concepts that included medical care, architectural design, and symbolic communication. Her largest cub's participation in these efforts showed evidence of generational knowledge transfer that went far beyond simple imitation. This wasn't just learned behavior. This was active teaching and learning occurring in a crisis situation, demonstrating educational capabilities that should have been impossible for wild animals. Michael's hand trembled as it reached for the Dr. handle, his mind racing through everything he knew about bear behavior, knowledge that seemed inadequate in the face of what he was witnessing. The mother bear's eyes locked onto his movement, her gaze carrying an intelligence that transcended species barriers. In that moment, as his fingers touched the cold metal of the handle, time itself seemed to pause. The mother bear's reaction to his approach demonstrated a level of social awareness that would later be studied in behavioral research centers worldwide. Instead of showing any sign of aggression or territorial response, she began what appeared to be a carefully choreographed sequence of submissive behaviors. She lowered her massive body to the ground, turned slightly sideways to appear less threatening, and made a soft, rumbling sound that seemed designed to comfort not just her cubs, but Michael as well. What happened next would become the most studied. A moment in wildlife behavioral history. The mother bear, with movements that defied everything known about ursine behavior, began preparing her cubs for the interaction. She gathered the two smallest, nearly frozen cubs with impossible gentleness, positioning them closest to the door. Her movements weren't random. They showed clear purpose and understanding of the situation's delicacy. The third cub, though, barely conscious, followed its mother's guidance with remarkable precision. It moved exactly where she indicated, maintaining a non-threatening posture that mimicked her own. The largest cub, still showing signs of coordination despite its weakened state, positioned itself protectively near its siblings while maintaining a deliberately submissive stance. Michael's security cameras captured every moment of what would become known as the most extraordinary example of interspecies cooperation ever recorded. The mother bear, her fur crystallized with ice that caught the strengthening morning light, began a series of movements that demonstrated unprecedented understanding of human social boundaries. First, she carefully cleaned her massive paws in the snow, removing any dirt or debris. Then, with movements that showed remarkable awareness of human hygiene concerns, she began grooming her cubs, paying special attention to their paws and faces. This wasn't just instinctive cleaning. This was deliberate preparation for entering a human dwelling. The Arctic wind howled with renewed fury, driving the temperature to levels that threatened even the bear's legendary cold tolerance. Ice crystals formed on their fur with frightening speed, creating a crystalline coating that would have been beautiful if it weren't so deadly. The mother bear's response to this escalating crisis showed problem-solving abilities that went far beyond instinct. She began what appeared to be a systematic demonstration of her understanding of human domestic spaces. Using her paw with surgical precision, she created marks in the snow that resembled a simple floor plan. She indicated separate areas for resting, movement, and what appeared to be designated spaces for waste elimination. This wasn't just random marking. This was a clear attempt to communicate her understanding of human living arrangements. The two smallest cubs, their condition now critical, were carefully lifted by their mother in a way that minimized any potential damage to Michael's property. She held them close to her body, using her own rapidly depleting warmth to protect them from further heat loss. The precision of her movements showed an understanding of both medical urgency and property respect that should have been impossible for a wild animal. The third cub, following its mother's example with remarkable accuracy, began mimicking her careful preparation behaviors. It would pause at each step, looking to its mother for confirmation before proceeding. This wasn't just learned behavior. This was active participation in a complex social protocol that demonstrated unprecedented levels of animal intelligence. As Michael slowly opened his door, the mother bear's response demonstrated levels of self-control that would later force scientists to completely reimagine their understanding of animal consciousness. Instead of rushing toward the warmth, she maintained her position, waiting for explicit permission to enter. Her eyes, filled with an intelligence that seemed almost human, never left Michael's face. The largest cub, though severely weakened by the cold, displayed equally remarkable restraint. It maintained its protective position near its siblings while showing clear signs of understanding the delicate nature of the situation. This wasn't just trained behavior. This was evidence of complex social awareness that bridged the gap between wild and domestic spaces. What happened next would become the most widely studied example of animal intelligence in modern history. The mother bear, with movements that showed impossible precision, began what appeared to be a formal entry ritual. She carefully guided each cub through a series of behaviors that demonstrated clear understanding of human domestic protocols. First, she showed them how to wipe their paws clean in the snow. Then, she demonstrated how to enter without touching the doorframe or walls. Each movement was calculated to minimize impact on the human dwelling, while maximizing efficiency in getting her weakened cubs to safety. This wasn't just careful movement. This was evidence of complex spatial awareness and social understanding. The mother bear's communication attempts reached new levels of sophistication as she prepared to enter Michael's cabin. She began what appeared to be a series of gestures that indicated temporary versus permanent residence. She would point to her cubs, then to the sky, then make sweeping motions that seemed to indicate the passage of time. The message was clear. She understood this was temporary shelter, not a permanent home. Using her massive body with incredible delicacy, she began assisting her weakest cubs through the doorway. Each movement was precisely calculated to avoid any damage to Michael's property while ensuring her cubs' safety. This wasn't just careful maneuvering. This was evidence of complex spatial awareness and property respect that should have been impossible for a wild animal. The largest cub's behavior during this transition demonstrated equally remarkable intelligence. It began what appeared to be a form of security patrol, checking each sibling's position and movement while maintaining awareness of both its mother's signals and Michael's presence. This wasn't just protective behavior. This was evidence of complex situational awareness that showed unprecedented levels of cognitive ability. As each cub crossed the threshold into the warmth of Michael's cabin, the mother bear's actions continued to defy every known principle of wild animal behavior. She maintained perfect awareness of her family's position while showing remarkable respect for human property. Her movements were so carefully controlled that she barely disturbed the air around her, much less any of Michael's belongings. The implications of her behavior were staggering. This wasn't just unusual animal behavior. This was evidence of cognitive abilities that forced humans to question everything they thought they knew about the limitations of animal intelligence. The mother bear wasn't just seeking shelter. She was demonstrating an understanding of complex social protocols that included property respect, temporary residence understanding, and careful coordination of group movement. Each gesture, each careful movement, each demonstration of property respect built upon the previous ones in ways that showed clear understanding of human social structures and domestic protocols. This wasn't just a desperate animal seeking shelter. This was a thinking, reasoning being using sophisticated social awareness to ensure both her family's survival and the maintenance of peaceful human-wildlife interaction. Once inside Michael's cabin, the mother bear's behavior transcended every known boundary of wildlife intelligence studies. Her first actions demonstrated a level of spatial awareness and consideration that would later be studied in universities worldwide. With movements that seemed impossibly delicate for a creature of her size, she guided her family to the corner furthest from Michael's living space, creating a clear boundary between their temporary sanctuary and his territory. The two smallest cubs, their bodies still dangerously cold, were carefully placed by their mother on a fallen blanket near the cabin's wood stove. What happened next would challenge everything scientists thought they knew about animal problem-solving. Abilities. The mother bear, after careful observation of Michael lighting the stove, began demonstrating what appeared to be an understanding of the relationship between fire and warmth. She positioned her cubs at the optimal distance from the heat source, not too close to risk burning, but near enough to benefit from the warmth. This wasn't just instinctive behavior. This was evidence of complex understanding of heat transfer and safety principles that should have been impossible for a wild animal to comprehend. The third cub, though still severely weakened, began showing signs of recovery in the cabin's warmth. Its behavior during this transition demonstrated remarkable adaptation to the indoor environment. Instead of exploring or touching objects out of curiosity, it maintained perfect position where its mother had placed it. showing an understanding of property boundaries that defied natural instincts. What truly astonished Michael was the largest cub's response to their new environment. Instead of succumbing to the natural urge to explore, it began what appeared to be a systematic patrol of their designated area, carefully noting but never touching any of Michael's belongings. This wasn't just trained behavior. This was evidence of complex spatial awareness and respect for human property. The mother bear's attention to cleanliness inside the cabin demonstrated levels of hygiene awareness that would later force researchers to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about wild animal behavior. She began creating what appeared to be designated areas within their corner, one for resting, one for the cubs to relieve themselves if necessary, and a clear path to maintain their distance from Michael's living space. Using fallen newspapers with surgical precision, she created a makeshift sanitation area that would contain any mess her cubs might make. This wasn't just basic cleanliness. This was evidence of sophisticated understanding of human domestic standards that went far beyond instinct. As the cubs began to warm up, their behavior proved equally extraordinary. Instead of becoming more energetic or destructive as their strength returned, they maintained perfect discipline within the boundaries their mother had established. Each cub seemed to understand the temporary nature of their shelter and the importance of maintaining perfect guest behavior. The mother bear's attention then turned to what would become one of the most studied aspects of this encounter: her interaction with Michael's cat, Whiskers, who had emerged from hiding under the couch. Instead of showing any predatory response, she began what appeared to be a deliberate demonstration of peaceful coexistence. She gathered her cubs close and made a soft, rumbling sound that seemed designed to communicate non-aggression. Then, in a display that would later be analyzed in countless behavioral studies, she began teaching her cubs how to react to the cat's presence. She would point to Whiskers, then demonstrate calm, non-threatening body language, which her cubs immediately mimicked. This wasn't just unusual behavior. This was evidence of sophisticated social awareness that bridged multiple species barriers. The mother bear wasn't just controlling her own responses. She was actively teaching her cubs how to modify their behavior to maintain peace in a multi-species environment. As the morning progressed, the mother bear's attention to detail in maintaining their temporary shelter became even more remarkable. When one of the recovering cubs accidentally knocked over a small vase, her response demonstrated unprecedented levels of property respect. She immediately picked up the vase with impossible gentleness and, in a gesture that would later be studied by experts worldwide, attempted to place it back exactly as it had been. The largest cub's participation in these cleanup efforts showed evidence of learned behavior that went far beyond simple imitation. It began helping its mother maintain their space, using fallen newspapers to wipe up any watermarks from their melting fur, and keeping its siblings away from Michael's belongings. This wasn't just trained behavior. This was active participation in maintaining human domestic standards. When Michael's phone rang, the mother bear's response demonstrated levels of situational awareness that should have been impossible for a wild animal. Instead of showing fear or aggression at the sudden noise, she calmly gathered her cubs closer and waited for the sound to stop. Then, in a gesture that would later be analyzed by cognitive researchers, she pointed to the phone, then to herself, then to the door, as if understanding that the communication device might mean more human presence. As the cubs showed signs of complete recovery, the mother bear began what appeared to be preparation for their eventual departure. Her actions demonstrated an understanding of temporary shelter versus permanent residence that went far beyond instinct. She began teaching her cubs what appeared to be protocols for leaving, how to check the weather, how to move without disturbing anything, and how to clean up any traces of their presence. Using her massive paw with remarkable precision, she demonstrated how to smooth the blanket they had used, how to gather any shed fur, and how to return the space to its original condition. This wasn't just basic cleaning. This was evidence of sophisticated understanding of human domestic standards and the importance of leaving no trace. The cubs' participation in these preparatory activities showed evidence of complex learning that would later be studied in detail. Each cub seemed to understand not just the actions required, but the reasoning behind them. They worked together to maintain their space, showing levels of cooperation and property respect that challenged everything scientists thought they knew about wild animal behavior. Throughout their stay, the mother bear maintained constant awareness of Michael's presence and comfort level. She would regularly check his reaction to their activities, modifying her family's behavior based on his responses. This wasn't just basic observation. This was evidence of sophisticated social awareness and emotional intelligence that bridged the species barrier in unprecedented ways. The implications of their behavior inside the cabin were staggering. This wasn't just unusual animal behavior. This was evidence of cognitive abilities that forced humans to question everything they thought they knew about the limitations of animal intelligence. The mother bear and her cubs weren't just seeking shelter. They were demonstrating an understanding of complex social protocols that included property respect, hygiene awareness, and multi-species cooperation. Each careful movement, each demonstration of property respect, each example of social awareness built upon the previous ones in ways that showed clear understanding of human domestic standards and social structures. This wasn't just a family of bears taking shelter. This was a thinking, reasoning family using sophisticated social awareness to ensure successful coexistence in a human environment. As the cubs regained their strength in the warmth of Michael's cabin, their behavior began displaying levels of intelligence that would revolutionize our understanding of wildlife consciousness. The mother bear's careful orchestration of their recovery demonstrated not just medical knowledge, but an understanding of rehabilitation principles that should have been impossible for a wild animal to possess. The largest cub, now fully warmed and alert, began displaying what appeared to be supportive care behaviors toward its smaller siblings. It would check their breathing, gently massage their limbs to improve circulation, and maintain constant physical contact to share body heat. This wasn't just instinctive care. This was evidence of learned medical knowledge being applied with deliberate precision. The mother bear's attention to her cub's recovery process showed sophisticated understanding of progressive rehabilitation. She began what appeared to be a series of carefully designed mobility exercises, starting with the smallest movements and gradually increasing complexity as her cubs regained strength. Each exercise seemed perfectly calibrated to their individual conditions, showing an understanding of personalized medical care that went far beyond instinct. What truly amazed Michael was the way the bear family maintained perfect awareness of their temporary status in his home. As they recovered, they began what appeared to be preparation drills for their eventual departure. The mother would guide her cubs through sequences of movements that mimicked their planned exit, always maintaining respect for Michael's space and property. The two smallest cubs, now fully conscious and recovering well, began displaying remarkable levels of learned behavior. They would carefully clean up any traces of their presence, smoothing the blanket they used, and even attempting to arrange it in its original position. This wasn't just tidying, this was evidence of sophisticated understanding of human domestic standards. Perhaps most extraordinarily, the mother bear began what appeared to be a form of educational session with her cubs. Using the temporary shelter as a teaching opportunity, she demonstrated complex social behaviors that would help them navigate future human encounters. She would point to various human objects, then show her cubs appropriate responses and safe distances to maintain. The third cub's recovery progress demonstrated remarkable adaptation to the indoor environment. Instead of becoming more energetic or destructive as its strength returned, it began showing what appeared to be deliberate self-control exercises. It would practice walking near Michael's belongings without touching them, maintaining perfect distance and awareness. Michael's cat Whiskers had now become an unexpected part of their temporary family dynamic. The mother bear used this opportunity to teach her cubs complex lessons about interspecies cooperation. She would demonstrate peaceful coexistence behaviors, showing her cubs how to modify their movements and energy levels to avoid frightening the much smaller animal. What happened next would become one of the most studied aspects of this extraordinary encounter. The mother bear began what appeared to be a systematic lesson in human domestic protocols. She demonstrated how to identify and respect human personal spaces, how to recognize and avoid delicate objects, and how to maintain appropriate noise levels indoors. Using her massive paw with surgical precision, she created what appeared to be teaching diagrams in the dust of the wooden floor. She would draw simple representations of human objects, then demonstrate appropriate behaviors around them. This wasn't just basic training. This was evidence of sophisticated educational methods that bridged the species barrier. The largest cub's participation in these lessons showed remarkable comprehension and adaptation. It began creating its own practice scenarios, setting up small challenges for its siblings that tested their understanding of human spatial boundaries. This wasn't just imitation. This was active learning and teaching being passed between generations. Throughout their recovery, the mother bear maintained constant awareness of Michael's comfort level. She would regularly check his reactions to their activities, modifying her family's behavior based on his responses. This wasn't just basic observation. This was evidence of sophisticated emotional intelligence that recognized and respected human emotional cues. As their strength returned fully, the bear family's behavior evolved into what appeared to be a coordinated preparation for departure. The mother began teaching her cubs what seemed to be protocols for leaving temporary shelter. She demonstrated how to check weather conditions, how to assess outside temperatures, and how to plan safe travel routes. Using the cabin's windows as teaching tools, she would point out weather patterns and demonstrate how to read natural signs that indicated safe travel conditions. This wasn't just basic survival training. This was evidence of sophisticated environmental awareness being passed from mother to offspring. The cubs' participation in these preparation activities showed remarkable levels of comprehension. They would take turns practicing weather assessment, each demonstrating understanding of different environmental indicators. This wasn't just learned behavior. This was evidence of complex knowledge transfer that went far beyond instinct. As evening approached and the Arctic storm began to show signs of weakening, the mother bear initiated what appeared to be final preparation sequences for their departure. She began organizing her family in what seemed to be a practiced formation, each cub understanding its position and role in their exit strategy. The two smallest cubs, now fully recovered from their near-death experience, demonstrated remarkable awareness of the significance of their temporary shelter. They began what appeared to be a systematic farewell ritual, carefully acknowledging each area of the cabin that had contributed to their survival. The third cub, its strength now fully restored, began participating in what appeared to be a final clean-up protocol. It worked alongside its mother to ensure they would leave no trace of their presence, showing understanding of human domestic standards that went far beyond basic tidiness. The largest cub's behavior during these preparations demonstrated remarkable leadership qualities. It began helping its smaller siblings practice their exit formations, showing patience and guidance that mimicked their mother's teaching style. This wasn't just helpful behavior. This was evidence of sophisticated social development and responsibility. The mother bear's final preparations included what appeared to be deliberate demonstrations of gratitude. She began creating what looked like recognition patterns in their designated space, using available materials to leave clear but non-destructive marks that future researchers would interpret as expressions of thankfulness. Each careful movement, each preparation step, each demonstration of gratitude built upon the previous ones in ways that showed clear understanding of human social structures and appreciation. This wasn't just a family preparing to leave shelter. This was a thinking, reasoning group expressing complex emotions and social awareness that bridged species barriers in unprecedented ways. The implications of their behavior during recovery and preparation were staggering. This wasn't just unusual animal behavior. This was evidence of cognitive abilities that forced humans to question everything they thought they knew about the limitations of animal intelligence. The mother bear and her cubs weren't just recovering in a temporary shelter. They were demonstrating an understanding of complex social protocols that included rehabilitation awareness, educational methods, and expressions of gratitude. As the Arctic storm began to show signs of subsiding, the mother bear initiated what would become the most studied farewell ceremony in wildlife history. Her actions demonstrated not just gratitude, but an understanding of formal social protocols that would force scientists to completely reimagine their understanding of animal intelligence. The mother bear began by gathering her cubs into what appeared to be a ceremonial formation. With movements that showed remarkable precision, she positioned them in a perfect arc, facing Michael, their bodies aligned with a symmetry that spoke of deliberate arrangement rather than random grouping. This wasn't just organization. This was evidence of sophisticated understanding of formal presentation. The two smallest cubs, their recovery nothing short of miraculous, started what appeared to be a choreographed sequence of gratitude gestures. Each cub, following their mother's silent guidance, stepped forward in turn to perform what researchers would later describe as a primitive but unmistakable boo. They would lower their heads, maintain the position for exactly 3 seconds, then step back into formation. What truly astounded Michael was the level of coordination displayed in their farewell ceremony. The third cub, picking up on its siblings' rhythm, added what appeared to be a gentle vocalization to its bow, a soft, musical sound that carried clear tones of gratitude. The largest cub concluded the sequence with a combination of bow and paw gesture that seemed designed to convey both respect and appreciation. The mother bear's orchestration of this farewell ceremony showed evidence of social awareness that transcended known boundaries of animal behavior. She maintained perfect control of the ceremony's pace, using subtle body movements and soft vocalizations to guide her cubs through each stage of their goodbye ritual. This wasn't just coordinated movement, this was evidence of sophisticated social choreography. Using her massive paw with impossible delicacy, she began creating what appeared to be a final message in the cabin's floor dust. The symbols, while crude, showed clear intentionality, a series of marks that researchers would later interpret as representing their journey from crisis to salvation. This wasn't just random marking, this was an attempt at recording their story for future understanding. The largest cub's participation in this farewell ceremony demonstrated remarkable awareness of ceremonial importance. It began adding its own marks to its mother's message, creating what appeared to be additional symbols that complemented the main story. This wasn't just imitation. This was evidence of collaborative storytelling that bridged generations. What happened next would become one of the most studied aspects of their departure. The mother bear began what appeared to be a systematic acknowledgement of the cabin's features that had ensured their survival. She would gesture to the wood stove, then perform a small bow. She would indicate the blankets they had used, then add another gesture of appreciation. Each movement was precise, deliberate, and clearly intended to convey specific gratitude. The cub's mimicry of these acknowledgments showed evidence of learning that went far beyond simple imitation. They weren't just copying their mother's movements. They were adding their own variations, each cub seeming to emphasize the aspects of their shelter that had meant most to them. This wasn't just learned behavior, this was evidence of individual expression within a formal social framework. As they prepared for their final exit, the mother bear's attention to detail became even more extraordinary. She began what appeared to be a systematic cleaning ritual, ensuring they would leave no trace of their presence beyond their intentional message of gratitude. Her movements showed understanding of human domestic standards that went far beyond basic tidiness. Using fallen pine needles from Michael's firewood as natural brushes, she demonstrated remarkable ingenuity in cleaning up any signs of their stay. She showed her cubs how to gather their shed fur, how to smooth out any marks on the floor, and how to return all objects to their original positions. This wasn't just cleaning, this was evidence of sophisticated understanding of human spatial preferences. The two smallest cubs, their strength now fully restored, participated in this cleanup with remarkable enthusiasm. They would work together to tackle larger tasks, showing coordination and cooperation that spoke of deep family bonds. Their movements were careful, deliberate, and always mindful of Michael's property. The third cub's behavior during the cleanup demonstrated remarkable problem-solving abilities. It discovered that by using its fur to create static electricity, it could more effectively gather dust and small debris. This wasn't just clever cleaning. This was evidence of creative tool use that should have been impossible for a wild animal. The largest cub's role in their departure preparations showed evidence of learned leadership. It began organizing its siblings into efficient cleaning teams, directing their efforts with gentle nudges and soft vocalizations. This wasn't just helpful behavior. This was evidence of sophisticated social organization and delegation. As the final moment of departure approached, the mother bear's behavior demonstrated levels of social awareness that would challenge everything scientists thought they knew about animal consciousness. She began what appeared to be a formal request for permission to leave, making eye contact with Michael while performing a series of gestures that seemed to ask for his blessing. The cub's response to this final interaction showed remarkable understanding of social protocol. They maintained perfect formation, their bodies positioned in ways that demonstrated both respect and readiness for departure. This wasn't just trained behavior. This was evidence of complex social awareness that bridged the species barrier. The mother bear's final gesture would become the most studied moment of their entire encounter. She approached Michael with slow, deliberate movements, maintaining perfect eye contact. Then, in a display that would force researchers to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about animal cognition, she extended her paw in what appeared to be an attempt at a formal handshake. The implications of their farewell ceremony were staggering. This wasn't just unusual animal behavior. This was evidence of cognitive abilities that forced humans to question everything they thought they knew about the limitations of animal intelligence. The mother bear and her cubs weren't just leaving shelter. They were demonstrating an understanding of complex social protocols that included formal gratitude, ceremonial farewell, and recognition of human social customs. Each gesture, each careful movement, each demonstration of appreciation built upon the previous ones in ways that showed clear understanding of human social structures and gratitude expressions. This wasn't just a family leaving shelter. This was a thinking, reasoning group participating in a sophisticated social ritual that bridged species barriers in unprecedented ways. As the bear family made their final preparations to leave Michael's cabin, their departure sequence evolved into what researchers would later describe as the most sophisticated example of interspecies cooperation ever documented. The mother bear's organization of their exit demonstrated levels of coordination and awareness that transcended known boundaries of animal intelligence. The mother bear began by implementing what appeared to be a carefully planned departure protocol. Instead of simply leading her cubs out the door, she orchestrated a systematic sequence that showed remarkable understanding of human spatial considerations and safety protocols. She positioned each cub with precise attention to their size and strength, creating a formation that would minimize any impact on Michael's property while ensuring their safe exit. The two smallest cubs, now fully recovered from their near-death experience, demonstrated extraordinary discipline during the departure sequence. Following their mother's silent guidance, they began what appeared to be a ritualistic farewell to each area of the cabin that had contributed to their survival. They would pause briefly at each significant spot: the wood stove that had warmed them, the blanket that had sheltered them, the corner that had housed them, and perform what looked like a small gesture of gratitude. What truly astonished Michael was the level of environmental awareness the bears displayed during their exit preparation. The mother bear began checking weather conditions through the windows, assessing wind patterns by watching the movement of snow and tree branches. She would point out specific environmental indicators to her cubs, teaching them how to read weather signs even as they prepared to leave. The largest cub's behavior during their departure preparations showed remarkable leadership qualities. It began taking on the role of assistant coordinator, helping its mother organize its siblings while maintaining perfect awareness of Michael's presence and comfort level. This wasn't just helpful behavior. This was evidence of sophisticated social awareness and responsibility being passed between generations. Using her massive paw with surgical precision, the mother bear began creating what appeared to be a farewell message in the fresh snow just outside the door. The symbols, while primitive, showed clear intentionality, a series of marks that seemed to tell the story of their salvation. Each cub, in turn, added their own mark to this message, creating what researchers would later describe as a collaborative expression of gratitude. The third cub's participation in the departure sequence demonstrated remarkable adaptation of learned behaviors. It began implementing cleaning and organization techniques they had used inside the cabin to prepare their exit path through the snow. Using its paws with surprising dexterity, it cleared a neat pathway that would allow them to leave without creating unnecessary disturbance. What happened next would become the subject of countless behavioral studies. The mother bear began what appeared to be a formal departure ceremony, incorporating elements of both bear and human social customs. She gathered her family into a perfect semicircle facing Michael's door, then initiated a sequence of movements that seemed designed to bridge the communication gap between species. Each cub performed a distinct role in this farewell ceremony, showing levels of coordination that went far beyond simple imitation. The smallest cubs began with what appeared to be synchronized bowing movements, maintaining perfect timing despite their recent recovery. The third cub added a series of gentle vocalizations that seemed carefully modulated to convey specific emotional tones. The largest cub concluded the ceremony with what researchers would later identify as a complex combination of traditional bear greeting behaviors and observed human gestures. It created a unique hybrid of communication that demonstrated remarkable understanding of cross-species social protocols. Throughout their departure sequence, the mother bear maintained constant awareness of both her family's safety and Michael's. In comfort level, she would regularly pause their exit preparations to check his reactions, modifying their movements based on his responses. This wasn't just basic observation. This was evidence of sophisticated emotional intelligence that recognized and respected human emotional cues. As they prepared to step out into the now calming Arctic day, the mother bear initiated what appeared to be a final teaching moment for her cubs. She demonstrated how to check snow depth, assess ice conditions, and identify safe travel routes. Each lesson was delivered with remarkable patience, ensuring all 4 cubs understood these crucial survival skills. The cubs' response to these last-minute lessons showed evidence of complex learning that went far beyond instinct. They would take turns practicing each skill, demonstrating their understanding while adding their own variations based on their individual strengths. This wasn't just survival training. This was evidence of sophisticated knowledge transfer that incorporated individual learning styles. Using the snow-covered landscape as a natural classroom, the mother bear began teaching her cubs what appeared to be emergency return protocols. She would point to various landmarks around Michael's cabin, then demonstrate how to navigate back to this safe haven if future crises arose. This wasn't just route memorization. This was evidence of complex contingency planning. The larger cubs began adding their own marks to their mother's snow messages, creating what appeared to be additional navigation markers. These weren't random scratches. They showed clear intentionality in helping their smaller siblings remember the path to safety. This demonstration of forward thinking and family cooperation challenged everything scientists thought they knew about wildlife intelligence. As the moment of final departure approached, the mother bear's behavior demonstrated levels of social awareness that would revolutionize our understanding of animal consciousness. She began what appeared to be a systematic farewell that incorporated elements of both gratitude and promise. She would gesture to Michael's cabin, then to the distant mountains, then back to the cabin, clearly communicating their potential return in future emergencies. The cub's participation in this final communication showed remarkable understanding of its significance. They maintained perfect formation while adding their own gestures of appreciation, each contributing to what became a complex farewell message that transcended species barriers. This wasn't just goodbye. This was the establishment of a lasting connection between wild and human worlds. The implications of their departure ceremony were staggering. This wasn't just unusual animal behavior. This was evidence of cognitive abilities that forced humans to question everything they thought. They knew about the limitations of animal intelligence. The mother bear and her cubs weren't just leaving shelter. They were establishing ongoing relationships and contingency plans that showed sophisticated understanding of future possibilities. Each gesture, each careful movement, each demonstration of foresight built upon the previous ones, in ways that showed clear understanding of complex social and survival dynamics. This wasn't just a family leaving shelter. This was a thinking, reasoning group creating lasting connections and safety protocols that bridged species barriers in unprecedented ways. The mother bear's final actions before leading her family demonstrated remarkable understanding of human social customs. She created what appeared to be a permanent mark near Michael's door, not a destructive scratch, but a carefully crafted symbol that researchers would later interpret as a sign of ongoing connection and gratitude. This wasn't just marking territory. This was establishing a lasting bond between wild and human worlds that would challenge our understanding of wildlife relationships for generations to come. Michael stood in his doorway, watching the bear family disappear into the snow-laden spruce forest, his entire understanding of wildlife transformed by what he had just witnessed. The mother bear led her cubs in a perfectly maintained formation, their movements showing remarkable coordination as they navigated the deep snow. Every few steps, they would pause in unison, turn back toward the cabin, and perform what appeared to be a synchronized farewell gesture. The implications of this extraordinary encounter would ripple through the scientific community, challenging everything researchers thought they knew about animal intelligence. Michael's security cameras had captured every moment of the unprecedented interaction, providing irrefutable evidence of cognitive abilities that went far beyond what was previously thought possible in non-human species. The footage revealed remarkable details that even Michael had missed in the intensity of the moment. The mother bear's initial communication attempts showed evidence of sequential thinking and problem-solving that rivaled primate intelligence. Her use of symbols, gestures, and deliberate patterns demonstrated an understanding of abstract representation that would force researchers to completely reimagine the capabilities of wild animals. The cubs' behavior throughout their stay revealed levels of learning and adaptation that defied conventional wisdom about wildlife cognition. Their quick grasp of human domestic protocols, their careful attention to property respect, and their sophisticated cleanup efforts showed evidence of intelligence that bridged the gap between wild and domestic spaces in unprecedented ways. Scientists studying the footage were particularly struck by the family's departure sequence. The careful coordination, the symbolic farewell messages, and the establishment of future emergency protocols demonstrated levels of foresight and planning that challenged existing theories about animal consciousness. This wasn't just survival, behavior. This was evidence of complex thinking that included future contingencies and ongoing relationships. Wildlife behavioral experts from leading research institutions began arriving at Michael's cabin within days of the encounter. They meticulously documented every mark, every symbol, and every trace the bears had left behind. The mother bear's farewell message, carefully preserved in photographs and casts, became the subject of intense study. Researchers were amazed by the complexity of the symbols and their clear intentionality. The bear family's story quickly spread beyond scientific circles, capturing public imagination worldwide. Their extraordinary demonstration of intelligence, gratitude, and cross-species cooperation became a symbol of hope for human-wildlife relationships. Conservation organizations began using their story to promote more thoughtful approaches to wildlife interaction and habitat protection. Local wildlife authorities, impressed by the bear's remarkable behavior, established new protocols for human-wildlife encounters based on the intelligence and awareness the family had demonstrated. Their story became a cornerstone of ranger training programs, teaching a more nuanced understanding of wildlife capabilities and the potential for meaningful cross-species communication. Educational institutions incorporated the encounter into their curricula, using it to teach students about the unexpected depths of animal intelligence and the importance of approaching wildlife with respect and openness to their potential. The footage became a powerful tool for challenging preconceptions about the limitations of animal consciousness. Research teams began conducting long-term studies in the area around Michael's cabin, hoping to document more evidence of sophisticated wildlife behavior. Their findings suggested that the mother bear's extraordinary display of intelligence might not be as unique as initially thought. Other animals were showing signs of cognitive abilities that had previously gone unnoticed or unrecognized. The location where the bear family had disappeared into the forest became a point of particular interest. Researchers discovered a series of carefully placed markers leading away from Michael's cabin, subtle signs that showed evidence of deliberate communication. These weren't random marks. They appeared to be part of a sophisticated navigation system that the bears had established for potential future emergencies. Michael's role in the encounter led to him becoming an advocate for more compassionate approaches to wildlife interaction. His first-hand experience with the bear's remarkable intelligence and social awareness gave him a unique perspective that resonated with audiences worldwide. He began working with conservation organizations to promote understanding and protection of wildlife habitats. The smallest cub's near-death experience and miraculous recovery became a powerful symbol of resilience and the unexpected connections that can form between species in times of crisis. Their story inspired numerous initiatives focused on wildlife protection and the preservation of natural habitats that allow for safe human-wildlife interaction. The largest cub's demonstration of leadership qualities and sophisticated learning abilities became a focal point for researchers studying generational knowledge transfer in wild animals. Its quick adaptation to human protocols and careful attention to its siblings' safety suggested levels of social awareness that went far beyond instinct. Perhaps most remarkably, the mother bear's complex communication attempts and careful orchestration of her family's behavior led to new theories about animal consciousness and intelligence. Researchers began developing more nuanced approaches to studying wildlife behavior, looking for evidence of sophisticated thinking that might have been overlooked under previous paradigms. The implications of their extraordinary encounter continued to evolve as new details emerged from ongoing analysis of the security footage. Each review revealed additional layers of complexity in the bear's behavior, suggesting levels of intelligence and social awareness that would take years to fully understand. Michael's cabin became a symbol of the unexpected bridges that can form between human and wild worlds when approached with openness and respect. The bear family's story inspired a new generation of wildlife researchers, conservationists, and nature enthusiasts to look more deeply at the potential for meaningful connection across species barriers. The mother bear's final mark near Michael's door became a powerful symbol of this lasting connection. Researchers studying it discovered layers of meaning in its careful execution, evidence of deliberate communication that transcended traditional boundaries between wild and human spaces. This wasn't just a marking, it was a testament to the extraordinary potential for understanding between species. As time passed, the bear family's story became more than just a remarkable wildlife encounter. It became a catalyst for changing how humans view and interact with the natural world. Their demonstration of intelligence, gratitude, and sophisticated social awareness challenged fundamental assumptions about wildlife capabilities and opened new possibilities for human-animal relationships. The transformation in scientific understanding that resulted from this encounter led to fundamental changes in wildlife management practices worldwide. Researchers and conservation authorities began approaching wildlife with greater recognition of their potential for intelligent interaction, leading to more successful and harmonious relationships between human and wild communities. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.